Hi, fifth graders. For those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Miss Terenzi, and I am filling in for Mrs. Charbonneau, so you'll be seeing a little bit more of me during our writing videos. I'm looking forward to working with you all and getting to know you. So today we are starting a new project, and we will be working with fictional writing. So this is a chance for you to get really creative and show us what you've got, okay? So we're super excited. What is your task? Well, your task is to create a visual fictional narrative. And what we mean by that is this is going to be a story that you have made up. Okay, it's fiction, and it's going to be visual because over the next 2 weeks, you will be writing a fun and creative fictional narrative using Google Slides, okay? Normally, when you write a narrative or a paper, it is on a document, but we will be using Google Slides, and you can work with different templates and formats, and you get to be really creative about how you write your story, okay? So you will have the opportunity to choose your method and your style of writing. You may create a comic, a storybook, blog entries. Get creative with it, okay? Your story must include all the elements of a fictional narrative, which we will be going over in just a moment, okay? So there will be some requirements, but first you need to decide what type of fictional story you will be writing. So we have two different types. There's fantasy or imaginative, and these are things that could not happen in real life. So if you want to include superheroes or dragons or magic or anything that is make-believe in your story that could not happen in real life, that would be considered fantasy, okay? Or you could take a realistic fiction approach to it, and these are things that could happen in real life. So it's a story about average people, but didn't necessarily happen. You made it up, but it could happen, all right? So those are your two genres or types of fiction that you could choose from, okay? Now, I mentioned that you need to include elements of fiction in your narrative. So that would be characters, who's in your story. Extremely important because the characters are what guide the story and help us to understand it better. You need to also think about the setting. Where is your story going to take place, okay? And the setting doesn't necessarily just have to be one place. It could be multiple different places. That goes along with your plot, okay? So you need to think about what is your story going to be about, okay? So what's going to happen? Who is going to be a part of it? Where will this take place? What are the events that will take place? Those are all things that you need to think about before you can begin writing your story. You also need to think about perspective, okay? So whose point of view are you telling the story from? So usually you'll pick a main character and you will tell the story from their perspective, meaning you will step into their shoes, pretend that you're them, and you will tell the story from that perspective, okay? And you will explain in detail using descriptive language what's happening around you. You'll be the one telling the story as the narrator, okay? You also will need to include dialogue in your story. We know that dialogue helps us to understand the characters better and to understand the story as a whole better. And it makes it more engaging for the reader as well. So you'll need some dialogue in there as well. Another thing that's extremely important is a conflict/resolution. And what I mean by that is in any book, show, movie that you watch, there is always a conflict and a resolution, okay? It's called a story arc. So we start out with the beginning, and as the story progresses, we're approaching some sort of conflict, whether it's a problem or a dilemma or a mystery that needs to be solved, something that keeps the reader interested. It's a big event that happens, and it's the main point of the story, the focal point. And then after that happens, you need to have a resolution. So problems need to be solved. And you'll see that as we work on our story mountain in just a bit. Another thing you need to think about is your theme. So what lesson or message are you sending to your reader? Is there a moral of the story? There should be. What do you want your audience to learn? What have your characters learned throughout the story? So those are things that you need to think about as well. And for our project, you must include illustrations. So since this is a visual fictional narrative, you need to think about how you're going to present this and be super creative with it. Keep those illustrations in there, think about themes and how you want to do that, okay? And we'll be thinking about that today as we're planning. So those are all things that you need to include. Now, what I'm going to do is show you some examples of how you could go about this. So if you would like to create a comic, we will include these templates in there for you. You can play around with. Now, as you can see, there's text, but you can always go in there, delete it, and add your own text. You will be adding your own pictures, your own captions. So if you would like to use one of these templates, you may. Here's another example of a comic. And you could type in your own text boxes, your own images. You don't have to use all of these slides. You don't have to use these slides at all. It's your choice, but these are there for you if you decide to use them. And here is another option that you could use if you would like to make it look like a storybook, which is what I think I'm going to do for mine. You can insert text boxes and write your text on one side, put your pictures on another, put captions and pictures all over, and make it look like a storybook. So there's another option for you. And you don't have to use either of these templates. You could choose your own and create it yourself. That would be fine too. So what your task is for today is to start planning, okay? So this is what you will be completing. Your plan. So the first question is, what genre of fiction are you choosing? So are you going to take a fantasy or imaginative approach, or are you going to be doing a realistic fiction narrative? So that is where you will fill in which choice you are doing. How are you going to share your story? What format will you use? Will you be creating a comic? Will you be creating a picture or storybook? Is it going to be a blog? Is it something that you've thought of that we haven't mentioned in this video? Be creative with it. Try to come up with something. If you don't like the picture book or the comic book, try to think of something different and bring it up to your teacher and see what she says, okay? So those are your options. That's your first slide that you will be completing. This is the second slide, and this is a story mountain is what we call it, and it's called a mountain because when you think about it, if you're climbing up a mountain, you're reaching the peak of your mountain, and we will be reaching our peak of our story, and that will be the problem or the dilemma. So we start out in the beginning of our story, and we introduce the main characters, we describe the setting. What will your opening sentence be? So your task is going to be to fill in text boxes for each of these steps in the story mountain, and you will be putting bullet point notes of how your story is going to progress, okay? Now, these are not complete sentences. This is not you writing your whole entire story. This is just a brainstorming step. So in the beginning, you're introducing the main characters and describing the setting. What will your opening sentence or your hook be? So that will go in this box. In the second box, this is the build-up. So this comes after the introduction, but before our main event. So what things are happening leading up to the main event? What clues are there? What is said? How do you build up the excitement? Okay, how are you getting to that problem or dilemma? You're setting the scene for the rest of the story. Now, once you get to the problem or dilemma, things might go wrong. Is there a mystery? Or do terrible things happen? Are there any disagreements? This is the main focal point of your story. So what is it that your story is about? Then we reach the resolution. How are things going to be sorted out? Problems have to be solved and people made happy again. So you need to think about how you're going to solve that problem and how you're going to wrap up the story. With the ending especially. Does the story end happily ever after? What have people learned? What characters have changed? Okay, so that will be where you write about your ending. So let me show you an example of a story mountain that I have already created and planned so that you can see. Now, I have already had time to think about what I want my story to be about. So you will need to do some thinking and brainstorming first before you can even start these slides, okay? So I have chosen to write a fantasy fictional narrative, and I will be using a storybook format. So you will fill in a complete sentence what your plan is. Then I have already filled out my story mountain. And what I did was I created text boxes and I filled in the background as white because I wanted to make sure that I had enough room to write. Now, as you can see, my text boxes, filled them in using this right here, paint bucket, and they're a little bit big, so I'm actually going to drag that up so you can see it, and that's all right if yours go over. So in the beginning, I have Beatrix and Cleo. They are best friends. They're going to be characters. Celine is going to be the school bully, already has her powers. See, I'm not writing incomplete sentences. These are just bullet points to get my ideas down. Mrs. Winthorpe, she's going to be the principal. The setting, I have created a school for the gifted. Now my story is going to be about students having superpowers and trying to harness those superpowers by learning about them in this school. And you'll see as my story progresses what that's going to be about. So the school is going to be called Alvia, School for the Gifted, and Asteria. Asteria is the magical town that I've created. So my opening sentence is going to be, who would have thought that my worst nightmare would turn out to be the best thing that has ever happened to me? So that's my hook. I've already planned it. The build-up. How am I going to get to the main problem or dilemma? Well, Cleo and Beatrix, the two main characters, are going to arrive at Alvia, that's the school, and Celine, the school bully, is going to mess with them. She's sort of a bully. She likes to prank them and just mess around with them. So they start taking classes, but they can't harness their powers. So this is kind of a clue as to what the main problem is going to be. We have Celine messing with them, and they're going to start taking their classes, but they're not able to harness their powers yet, so they're trying really hard to. The main problem or dilemma that I have created is that Beatrix has this locket, and it's going to go missing. Oh, I made a little typo right here. It's going to go missing. Cleo tries to help her find it, and they come across a mystery note telling them how to find the locket. And they end up finding out that Celine has sent a pixie fairy away with it to the next town of Avalon. So this is the story that I've created. My main problem is going to be that Beatrix's locket has been stolen, okay? And Celine has messed with them, and they need to figure out how to get this locket back. So my resolution, I've thought about, how are they going to solve this? Well, they must find a way to sneak out to get to the necklace. There's strict rules at the school. That's what I'm going to write about, and they need to figure out how to get out there. And they're going to need to use their powers to get it. But the problem is that they don't have their powers because they're not able to harness them yet. So they need to practice. So that's going to be part of my solution, is them practicing using their powers. And then finally, they will be able to harness their powers and retrieve the locket. And as the big finale, Celine will be expelled from Alvia, okay? So I've sort of mapped out how my story is going to go. So this is what your task is going to be. You need to think about what your plot of your story is, who your characters are, and what your setting is. And you're just going to bullet point list what is going to happen in the beginning, what is going to happen in the build-up, what things are happening before we get to the main problem. We're setting the stage. What is the main problem or dilemma? How will we resolve it? And what is going to be the ending? So that is your task for today. As we move on into our next sessions, we'll begin writing and we'll be putting our slides together. So don't worry about any of that today. Today is just to plan. So your task is to complete those 2 slides. Okay? Let us know if you have any questions. Looking forward to seeing what you have planned.